Hey, and welcome to the Stories Unveiled podcast, where we talk about the purpose in every story and how to live in freedom from your past. I'm your host, Ashley Sears, and each episode you're invited into a conversation about real life between me and a friend. I believe if an issue is addressed in the Bible, then it's important to create a safe and supportive space to discuss it. While some of these conversations are not easy, I do believe they are worth it. If you like what you hear, please visit our ministry at storiesunveiledconference.com. Thank you for joining today. Welcome to episode 4. This episode, I was able to invite my friend Jessica Sharkey to the studio, and we had a great chat about mental health, her battle with anxiety, and wrestling with the decision to take medication. Jessica grew up a pastor's kid. She got married and is now a pastor's wife. She and her husband have 3 gorgeous children. Jessica is a public school teacher with a passion for ministry and her family. As we dive into this conversation, I hope it blesses you. Today, Jessica and I are chatting about mental health, but more specifically about the journey that she went on to get to where she is today. Jessica, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. We're just going to jump right in. Will you tell me when you first realized that you were struggling with anxious or depressed thoughts?
Yeah, I think growing up, I don't remember having a whole lot of them, although I did always hate being in trouble growing up. But I remember kind of making things work with school for me. That was a good environment for me because it was like, hey, here's the clear expectation. You know if you've met that expectation, and then you move on, and there's a clear ending to it. So I remember coming out of college after my husband and I got married and we started our first ministry job and just being really overwhelmed with the thought, how do I even know if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, if I'm doing a good job, if the Lord's pleased with the amount of effort that's going in, am I doing the right things? Am I the right person for this? And just a lot of self-doubt and just questions about that kind of flooded me because there wasn't a checklist of this is how you know that you're getting this correct. And so
there's no book for life.
There's no book, no, and for being an adult. So that was kind of a tough transition for me. And during the course of our first year or 2 of ministry, I began to develop an ulcer, which I didn't realize. I just remembered I just had this pit in my stomach all the time, and I didn't know what to do with it. And finally, I talked to my doctor, and she's like, let's do something about this.
This is a problem.
Yeah, kind of a problem. So at that point in time, it was like, okay, Lord, obviously I am not handling this well. And so I began to pray about that, and God just gave me some great verses at that time about taking thoughts captive. That became a really big verse for me because I could physically feel my body tensing up with that ulcer every time I started to feel anxious. And so once I had that physical reminder, it was easier to know, okay, just let go, breathe. It's going to be okay. And also the importance of Thanksgiving and not being anxious for anything, but everything through prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. So those were 2 verses that I really carried with me during that time that helped me kind of get through that initial first, encounter with anxiety in my adulthood.
Yeah. So your body was manifesting actual physical symptoms because of anxiety. And you were experiencing just didn't know where to go, what to do. So scripture was where you turned. Those were maybe some initial coping mechanisms. Is that true? Did you have any other coping mechanisms or anywhere that you saw breakthroughs during this initial time period?
Yeah, I think being able to use those verses as kind of that weapons in that warfare were really helpful. And I have some great supports in my life. My husband, my mom, and my dad, my sister, being able to talk through some of those things was really helpful. And I think at the time I thought, okay, now that I have this breakthrough, I'm good. We kind of settled some of those questions. God also really talked to me about the importance of loving others and what that really meant. And so there was a lot of breakthroughs at the beginning. And I thought, okay, this is going to be good. And then we wanted to start a family. And at that point in time, there was a big question on whether or not we'd be able to start a family. And so then it kind of brought all that back up, trusting the Lord, and God had to work through with me on that. And so we were able to have our beautiful son, and that was great. And there was some breakthrough there. And then our first ministry kind of ended tough. And so we wound up moving across the country. So like, okay, now we're settled. I'm an at-home mom. This is going to be great. Baby number 2, like that was also kind of difficult. We started to feel the desire to adopt. And so there's just a lot of unknowns and a lot of transition in my early adulthood where I kept thinking like, okay, if we can just get this job or if we can just have a family or if we can just get through this season, like then everything is going to be settled and it's going to be fine. And I'm not going to feel this way anymore. And that was kind of the thing that I kept hoping would be the case as we went through all these milestones. And of course, there'd be relief for maybe a moment, and then the next thing would happen, and I'd be winding up feeling the same way.
So it felt very circumstantial in the beginning, like your circumstances were what was causing this anxiety and these thoughts and these emotions was if I could just get through this. Because it sounds like there was a lot thrown at you from, being unsure if you were going to be able to start a family, what that looked like, how ministry stuff kind of maybe falling apart or not really going the way that, you and your husband had hoped. The ulcer, all of these things are thrown at you. It just seems like so much uncertainty. And if we could just get to a good season, I wouldn't feel this way anymore. But I'm assuming that wasn't necessarily the case. So will you tell me about one of the darkest points in this journey?
Yeah. So I think all that time I knew like I was having anxious thoughts, but I didn't really have a name for, oh man, I think I have anxiety. Like maybe I need to go and get some more tools and help for what I'm going through. Because again, the thought was, it's this.
Right.
And that's probably some truth to that with some of it, but it developed bigger than that. And it really came into a head several years ago now. We're going through a really hard season in our ministry and just really feeling heartbroken about some things and trying to, cope with some different circumstances that had come our way with that. But at the same time, my husband and I felt very strongly that this was the time for us to start our adoption journey. We really felt called and led of the Lord that adoption was going to be part of our story. And so we had put our stuff together and it just like sat for forever. And we had looked at several different places and ways to adopt. And so when we finally settled on one, we felt like, okay, this is it. This is what the Lord had called us to. And I think he did. I think it was part of that journey, but our paperwork sat for like 3 years in the middle of this like really difficult time in our church. Right. And just almost feeling like abandoned by God. Like, what on earth, Lord? I'm trying to be faithful. I'm trying to do all these things. And I don't know what you want from me at this time to try to have a breakthrough. And I remember thinking if either one of these things were going well, like I'd be okay. Right. But both of them were kind of at a standstill. And it really felt like a wilderness experience during that time where there wasn't all this, hearing from the Lord and all these things. And I realized like God needed to help me work through some forgiveness. He needed for me to work through some issues I had with trusting him during that time. I think I realized at the time that I was trusting in my idea of God and what I thought he would do and my expectation. And so when that didn't happen, then I felt disappointed, like God had let me down. And he led me to a point to realize like, I just need to trust him, whatever it is that his thoughts for me are good. And whether or not this thing works out, he is good. And it took, I remember kind of God peeling back those layers for me to realize this is what was happening. And we did finally get, things did finally change. We wound up changing our adoption program, went a totally different direction. And it was funny, by the time we did that, I thought, oh, our stuff's going to just sit and wait, so why rush? We finally got our paperwork in, and it was very, very quick, actually. We got our picture of our beautiful daughter, and I remember we were able to like travel very, very quickly. But again, at the time, there was some difficult things happening in our ministry at the same time as well. But thinking, okay, I've got a distraction right now. We're gonna adopt our daughter. Finally, been waiting for this for 3 years. And we got to meet her, and we had to come home for a little while. She's adopted from Uganda. And so we had to wait for some paperwork to happen. And I remember we were there with several other families, and they had all gotten their passports. And we were waiting and waiting and waiting, and ours wasn't. And it was like a comedy of errors. Like every single thing that could possibly happen with this passport happened. Like they ran out of books. They ran out of ink. They printed the wrong name. So many things. And so we're like just waiting, and I remember just being like, I had lost so much weight during that time. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep, just feeling so anxious and so frustrated. And I remember someone telling me like, well, just don't want it too bad. I'm like, well, how do you come boldly before the throne of God, but then also loosely enough he can do things? I just remember just being like, Lord, what game is this? Like, what do you want from me? And going into my living room with my Bible, I'm like, Lord, I don't even know where to pray. And I opened up the Bible to Psalms, which is an excellent book for those who are having big emotions. David is awesome for that. And just seeing like there was a psalm, I think it was Psalm 72, that talked about, God, I'm crying out to you and I don't hear from you. And all of these things are happening and I don't know what to do. And so I am frustrated because I feel like you don't hear me. So I'm going to just start rehearsing all the good things that you've done. And he starts talking about, man, you parted the seas. You fed us with manna. You did all of these things. I'm going to trust in you. And thinking, okay, God, like I'm broken at this point in time, but I'm going to do this. And I remember just like, okay, Lord, I'm just going to start in Genesis. Every single amazing thing that I know you've done, I'm going to start praising you for and thanking you for. And finally, I was able to get to the point in our life at that point in time and have like a huge breakthrough at that time, like a breakthrough that has helped me to this day. I can point back at this moment and think this was a change in my relationship with the Lord, where a lot of just chains were broken in that time, and thanking God and realizing, Lord, I trust you. So whatever's about to happen on the second half of my journey, Lord, I give it to you and I trust you, and you're not on trial. I'm not gonna go back to that place again, which was huge because the second half was very, very difficult. And I wound up going back to Uganda myself. Right. And I remember to go on the second half of the journey. But God was amazing. And some of the promises he gave me in that moment was actually how we were able to bring our daughter home, God was amazing through that. And I thought, okay, huge spiritual breakthrough. Right. My relationship with the Lord is better than it's been in years at that point in time. I don't feel like this is a trust issue with God at this point in time. Right. You've seen what he can do and he's carried you through. Exactly. And so like there wasn't that. I had actually stepped down from my position. I wasn't working anymore. I was an at-home mom. So I'm like that stress was gone. Right. My daughter was home. This long for beautiful girl is home. I have my 3 children. Our family's complete. All of the things that I kept thinking, well, if this happens, things are going to be good. And that was actually my darkest point. And that was the point. I remember it was Christmas morning. Let's talk about sad. I had been struggling for a couple of weeks and I went into a depression, frankly. And it was everything I could do to get up in the morning to do basic things like get dressed or feed my kids. And I'd kind of force myself into those things, but it took all of my energy every day. And I remember hearing my kids in the other room, little kids like 5 and 7, praying, Lord, help mommy to have a good day today so we can have a good Christmas. And it's like, oh, Lord, I've got to get help. Like, this isn't okay. This is not the mom that I want to be. Yeah. I don't want to put that burden on my kids and I don't want to feel this way. And this isn't normal. Like something's off. Something's off, yeah. And I'd kind of known that for a little while. I remembered speaking with somebody that had known me for a while and her saying, I don't know how to read you. And it was during this really difficult time in our ministry. And I remember thinking, I don't know how to read me either. Because like some days I can wind myself up enough to like put on a smile and say hello. And other days like, it was all I could do just to show up and thinking, what's wrong with me that I can't be this consistent person? And so with all of that coming into view, I realized, okay, something's got to change. I got to figure out what I can do to be me again, to be who God had created me to be the wife and the mother I needed to be for my kids. Yeah. So Christmas morning, gosh, that had to have been so hard to hear. And all 3, right? Your daughter was home as well. So it was all 3 of your kids were there praying for mom. And well, I can't imagine that was sustainable. The barely mustering enough, energy or whatever to get up and to get dressed and to feed your kids, and being a mom's hard anyways. So with just all of that, tell me about the kind of thought shift that you had when figuring out a different way. I think at that point in time, again, I was to the point where I couldn't blame a circumstance really.
Right. Things were good.
Right. And then that made me feel worse too. I'm like,
Right.
hey, what is your problem? Everything is, things are good. These are the things you've been praying for. So why is this such a struggle? And I couldn't really blame and say, hey, this is like a spiritual thing that you're dealing with. Just trust God more, do these things. Like I desperately wanted that. It was like every ounce of energy I had just to get through my day. And I remember having a conversation with someone close to me that was actually going through a similar struggle. And she talked about actually going to the doctor. And she had worked through other things as well, used other tools as well. And she wound up starting some medication to help her and the difference that was making for her. And it was the first time in my life that even occurred to me that could be even an option.
Really?
Or something that I could even go talk to my doctor about. I think I had always put that a little bit more in the, maybe in the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about it as much growing up.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, in my family, it wasn't necessarily like it was a taboo thing. It just, in the church world and everything, like it was, pray about it. And which is true, you should. And the scripture has great things to do as well. But there was this other element too, where it's like, am I allowed to go talk to my doctor about this and to see if there's some, maybe this medication part of it as well.
Because I'm just going to interrupt real fast, but because for you realized because of the really dark place you hit in the adoption process that it wasn't an unbelief thing.
Right.
It wasn't I'm struggling to believe that God is who he says he is or any of those things because you had seen it. You knew in your head and in your heart. And so it was like, something's got to give.
Yeah, something else. And also at the time I had some medical diagnosis too that makes you more susceptible to having struggles with anxiety and depression as well.
Okay.
On a kind of a chemical hormonal side of things. And so I decided, okay, I kind of tracked good days versus bad days, way, way more bad days than good days, and decided to call my doctor. And I remember her saying like, oh, good job. I'm like, I don't do that. Like, I'm here. Like, we'll just talk about it. Like, you know what? It's going to be fine. We'll try. And I think I was at the point where it's like, it's worth a shot. I'm going to see if this is something that could be helpful for me. And I even actually, my dad is a pastor. I think you mentioned that earlier. But I remember talking to my parents about it and being like, is that okay? And my dad talking like, you know what? If you had a blood sugar issue, if you were working, if you were dealing with diabetes and you needed some medical help with that to just get chemicals and your blood sugar up or whatever, you would do that.
Yeah.
If you had a broken bone and you needed some help with that, you would go get help with that.
When we're in pain, we take medicine or
Right.
Right.
And so if your body's not producing a chemical that it needs and you're out of balance there and you need to get some help here, that's okay to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like even though like I was a totally grown up, it was nice to be able to have that like, okay, from someone I respected so much on a spiritual level, like, okay, maybe it's okay to have this conversation. And so that is when I began taking an anti-anxiety medication. And for me, that made a huge difference in my life. It went from hardly any good days to hardly any bad days at that point in time. And so that was like such a huge, huge relief for me at the time. Like, okay, I felt like I could be the mom and wife that I wanted to be at that time. And so, that wound up being a positive for me.
That's great that you were able to, you had other resources because like you said, praying should always be our first line of defense, really in any situation, going to the Lord always and in prayer. But sometimes there are external things or other things that play into it and something's got to give. You need more. God has given us resources to be able to use. So tell me just a little bit more, I guess, about the struggle in actually making the choice to take medication, your decision-making process, and once you started medication, did you just go on it and then everything's been great or fine?
I wish, but it was helpful. I will say the initial going on medication, and there's been times where I have phased that out and times that I've come back. And I will say, I wish this wasn't the case, but oftentimes when I go on it initially, and especially the first time, there was a little bit of a feeling of failure for me. Like, what is your problem that you have to take medicine because you can't will your way out of this thing?
Yeah.
And you can't positive self-talk your way out of this thing or pray this thing away. And so there was a feeling of a little bit of discouragement and a little bit of oh, I wish I didn't have to do this. But I remember talking to that person that was very close to me as well about it. And she just said something so profound that kind of helped me with that. And she talked about I think that can be a source of pride at times where it's I will only accept help if it comes from myself. And if I can just make it myself. And so realizing to be humble enough to say, I need some extra help. And being able to accept something that, either counsel from other people that God absolutely prescribes in the Bible and talks about we need to carry each other's burdens. So going into a counselor is really important as well, but also being willing to what God has kind of allowed us to learn through medicine, if that may be a miracle for you.
Right.
And it was kind of a miracle for me that medicine even existed to kind of help re-regulate me. And I think at the time too, the thing that really pushed it over the edge where I was willing to get that help was my being a mother.
Yeah.
And realizing I have 2 biological children. I have an adopted daughter. And if they ever struggle with these things, I want them to know it's okay.
Yeah.
And to know that it can be healthy and okay to go talk to a counselor. Or if you needed medicine to help you, that's not a failure, that is okay and a healthy thing to do if you need to do that. And I also wanted them to know, for me, I felt I need to be that mom for them. I don't want their memory of me to be the mom that could barely get out of bed, at different times or was struggling through everything. I mean, I couldn't model healthy thought patterns if I wasn't taking care of my own stuff.
Right.
And so being a mom and knowing I got to kind of put on the oxygen mask, figure out those things first so that I can help you with your stuff and I'm not putting my stuff onto you, was really important to me. And so that kind of helped at the different seasons where I've needed to take medication. That's helped pull it through. But I would love to say that that's a magic bullet, but it's not. I mean, what it does for me is it helps make it feel a little bit more like a winnable game.
Yeah.
Instead of having 1,000 thoughts flooding at me all at once where I have a very difficult time capturing any of them, I feel like it allows me to be able to actually kind of take on a thought, figure out what it is that is off with that thought, and apply those tools that I have learned through my relationship with the Lord or through counseling or through other things too. It makes me be able to apply those with much less energy than it was taking before.
Yeah.
So it kind of helps with that piece of it, but it doesn't make it completely go away.
Right. It's not an either or, it's an and. There are so many things that play into it. This has just been one piece. Well, thank you so much for, such a vulnerable story. I have a couple last questions that I want to ask that make it really relatable for the listener. And the first I'm gonna ask is for the person listening who sees themselves in your story. What would you say to them? What kind of advice, or just a piece, like a nugget of maybe wisdom, something you've learned for that person?
I think what I wanted to know is that you're not a failure as a person if you're struggling with this. There's a lot of people who struggle with anxiety. I mean, I think especially with the pandemic and everything that our world has gone through, but there's also a lot of help and hope too. And to not be afraid to ask questions and to seek help, seek counseling, seek whatever it is that's going to help you be able to be healthy. And you don't have to just continue to live with that or hide that in shame. Find people, whether that be a doctor or a counselor or someone who's trusted in your life, to be able to work through those things, because God's given us a lot of tools in all those different areas. And so find something that's going to help you. And in no way am I pushing medication. Please know that.
This is not a PSA.
Not
it's
at
just your
all.
journey.
I totally recognize that that's not for everybody, you know, but for me, that was helpful. But for anybody listening, I think just find help.
Yeah.
Don't stay stuck.
Say something. Yeah, that's good. And now the last question is kind of on the flip side for maybe the person that doesn't find themselves in your story, but like your husband who has been a supporter and stuck by your side and been one of your biggest cheerleaders. What would you say to the support person who maybe has somebody in their life who's struggling with this?
One of the things I've really appreciated about my husband, he's been very patient. Much more patient than I probably would be. I wish I was more patient. He's been very patient with me. And I think also one thing that I appreciate about him too is when he allows me to speak the thoughts that I'm having, however off they may be, because that's part of it, like trying to uncover, like, what is this lie that I'm telling myself that's making me feel stuck, and not trying to cover that up, but like, let's get it out so we can work on it. So if I'm saying, man, I'm struggling with this, he's been really good about not being judgmental with that, but also pointing me towards truth as well. Like, that's not true. That's not true about you, or that's not true about God, or that's not true about this circumstance, and kind of pointing me towards what is more true, and helping me look up to the Lord as well. I think in that too, because I think sometimes when you get into those really anxious places, you can get your eyesight and your focus can be very narrow on the problem and on that specific thing, and where you lose sight of the big picture. And I think what he's been able to do oftentimes for me is help me, like, okay, lift up your head a little bit. There's a bigger picture here. This isn't going to be forever. This is a moment. You're going to feel this for a little bit, but you're going to get through it. It's going to be okay. And again, these are the things that are true. And so sometimes you need to hear that when you're feeling, you need to kind of stop that cycle. In order to stop that cycle, you need to replace it with some truth.
Yeah. And to have somebody in your life that will do that for you.
Yeah.
That's good. Thank you so much, Jessica. I very much appreciate just your transparency and your story. And I think that this is a topic that is so needed, whether it be in the church, outside of the church. But I think people are kind of afraid to talk about it. And just with how rampant mental illness and depression and so many things are, especially these days, I just am appreciative for this conversation. So thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation on the Stories Unveiled podcast. We would love it if you would leave us a rating or review. If you would like to learn more about Stories Unveiled and our events, go to storiesunveiledconference.com or follow us on Facebook or Instagram at storiesunveiled_. The Stories Unveiled podcast is created in partnership with KTSY and Barefoot Media Ministries. For more encouragement and other podcasts, visit ktsy.org. Have an incredible day and go live unveiled.